struck by Davy Cooper. Back with Wilkins. Absolutely magnificent from Ray Wilkins. Well with the header, but it's Durant again. The last chance perhaps for Rangers. A chance is on for goal. Durant makes it 2-apiece. Johnston, and he scored.
Against Cantona, nicely left there by Haitley, and here's the break on. It's Ian Durant, through to Haitley. McCoist on the far side. Gary Speed is racing back to provide the cover. Here's Ali McCoist. Oh, he's done it! Ali McCoist from Rangers.
Here's Gascoigne now. Can he produce some magic? Still it's Gascoigne. Oh yes! A tremendous goal by Gascoigne. It's been very evenly balanced. Here's Gascoigne now, pushing forward, showing great determination. Oh, he's done it again!
There's a slip by O'Neill, and Laudrup to win. Rangers look for a goal and get one in the 8th minute from Brian Laudrup. Celtic's wall is 5 strong, but Alberts gets it through. The hammer has torn Celtic apart.
It's Barry Ferguson. Oh yes! The captain shows the way. Here now is Neil McCann. Is there going to be a twist in the tail? Lovenkrands! Yes, there is! Peter Lovenkrands! It had to be him! He has surely won the Scottish Cup!
Like this, here's Davis, put in by Darshville. Davis! Darshville! They've nicked it! Away from home! Manchester, brace yourself. Rangers are coming!
Bit of stoppage time. Kevin Thompson's corner. It's Bagheera! Borat stops it. Boyd! Edu has put it in! Boris Edu! Right at the end!
There's no doubt Vice has made an impact since he has come onto the park. Jelavic is in behind. It's Jelavic for Rangers! It's scored!
Jelavic on to Davis, and Lafferty's in already. He scored inside the first minute. Luco, definitely a threat. Still going. That is just brilliant. A goal for Luco. A goal for the fans. A goal for the cause. Here's Mackay. Barry Mackay. Looking to make it happen here. He might just do that. Right check! Deflected off Brown and in!
And Gulacsi was missing, and there's Lundstrom! John Lundstrom with the goal! But here's Joe Aribo, a slip from Tutan. Aribo! A bolt from the blue! Joe Aribo!
Hello everyone and welcome along to your Wednesday live edition of the TII podcast. My name is Craig Dennett and I'm back in the host chair this evening as we talk about all things Rangers, and as the title suggests, should Rangers continue with Ross Wilson? The comments are already flying in on that one. It's safe to say everyone has an opinion. Before we go on to that, I'll introduce our two contributors joining us this evening. First up, Scott Cameron. How are you doing, Scott?
Good. It should be an interesting discussion. Plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's probably an understatement of the century there. We're also joined by Ben. How are you doing, Ben?
Yeah, doing well, thanks. Yep, glad to be back on and glad to be a few days further on from Sunday.
Yeah, for the listeners, Ben said to me beforehand that there was no way he could have made the pod on Monday. He was still so frustrated with Sunday, and I think we all were with that situation. Right, as the comments suggest, Ross Wilson is a big talking point amongst Rangers fans at the moment. Before we get to Ross Wilson, although slightly related, we'll touch on the departure of James Sands, which was announced earlier on today. James Sands is returning to his parent club, New York City FC, ahead of the start of the MLS season, which I think started at the weekend there, if I'm correct. In the statement, Michael Beale said, "I would like to thank James for his time at Rangers. He was a well-liked player in our squad, and I enjoyed working with him on a daily basis. I believe he will go on to have an excellent career. The opportunity to return to New York City FC for the start of the MLS season, where he will be a key player in their squad, it was something we felt was correct for all parties. Everyone at Rangers wishes him well moving forward." Now, Scott, I saw you kind of poke a wee bit of fun at the wording there in terms of moving forward. I'll start with you, just with your thoughts on that announcement first of all, and then your thoughts on James Sands as a player in this time at Rangers.
To be honest with you, it's been on the cards for a few weeks. Obviously, MLS about to start, as you rightly say. Clearly wasn't part of Michael Beale's plans. Had been pretty limited in the first 3 months. Wish him well. I'm just grateful that it was a loan signing. You know, it was one of these ones. We're obviously going to talk about Ross Wilson, but if we'd signed him for 3 or 4 million and then we'd had to shift him within 18 months at a loss, then. But it's one of those. We've taken a punt. It hasn't really worked out. He had some decent games. He had some bad games. Overall, it's just one of these things. He probably will have a decent career over there, but just wasn't cut out to play in Scotland, basically, or for Rangers.
Yeah, Ben, I've seen the comments already suggesting that people are quite happy to see the back of James Sands. That's probably quite a harsh way to put it, but in terms of it's not quite worked out for him as we'd hoped at Rangers. I've seen some people on social media saying he was a bit of a stupid signing. I would have to probably disagree with that one. 21-year-old full international, young player of the year in the MLS. Signed him on an 18-month loan with the fee already agreed. He was a highly thought of player, and he was a versatile player as well. We saw the various different positions he played for us. It just didn't work out for him at Rangers quite how we hoped. But ultimately, with the way the deal was structured, meant that he returns to New York City with very, very minimal outlay from our side, and there's not really much harm done. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree with anyone that is against and thinks it was a bad idea to take the gamble on it. It was a gamble, but I mean, it's a young player, as you said, full international, can play in a number of positions. All right, it hasn't worked out, but it's the type of signing that on paper could have worked out, and I can see why we have gone for it. Not that I'm defending any directors of football at this minute in time, but yeah, I feel that the signing on paper and in principle was good. I'm not rejoicing that he's gone, but he certainly wasn't. He'll not be missed, really. The one thing that I would say is, I look back and if I try to remember his time, that he was sensational against PSV the night we qualified for the Champions League, and that was his only real contribution. The only thing in mitigation, and I'm probably get a bit of abuse for this, is that I don't think he ever really got a run in his position in midfield in the team. Now, people might say that that's because he's not good enough, which may well be the case. But I would argue that the people that have been continually getting a run in those positions haven't been good enough either, have they?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And he was chucked in the deep end, I think it's fair to say, in terms of playing centre-half alongside Leon King for much of that Champions League campaign. And I think that was symptomatic of the squad issues that we'll come on to talk about a bit later. But it was also not his fault that he was brought into that one. On the other side of things, Caroline says that he gave me the fear he was a walking red card at times, and I think no more so than in those Champions League games was James Sands exposed as quite an inexperienced player, especially at that level. Scott, why don't you think it worked out for James Sands?
I think, what was his? I never ever heard him say what was his position. What did he consider his position? Was he quite happy to be that versatile player? I would quite like to have seen him given an opportunity as the number 6. It's been something that we've been crying out for. No say he's going to be the American version of Stephen Davis, but without 5, 6, 7 games opportunity, how are you going to know? Playing alongside Leon King, I think that's what most people will remember him for, is the car crash. What that was, the Champions League group stage, but they were just 2 young guys that were put into a position well out their capabilities at this point. So I think it's just that he never really got an opportunity to show what he could do. See if he was playing centre half alongside Connor Goldson, possibly. You don't know, but I think circumstance just hasn't favoured them, and I think 5 games at centre half alongside Leon King doesn't. That's not a fair time to judge anybody, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think James Sands, looking from the outside in, got a pretty raw deal with a lot of the times he did get to start for Rangers. It wasn't his fault, and he obviously did the best he could in that situation. I think what a lot of the comments said, I'll go back to John Weir's comment here. Sands, he's a decent player, but he just wasn't good enough for us, and I think that's probably a fair assessment in my eyes of how it looks. Ben, we spoke about the fact it was an 18-month loan and an agreed fee that was able to be triggered should we want to buy James Sands. I believe the agreed fee was probably about £3 to £3.5 million, if I remember correctly. Is the feeling, do you think, just that we could spend that £3.5 million more or better or more smartly, or try and use some words that are actually English? Is there do you think that there was just, we can sign better players for £3.5 million?
Well, Robbie Matondo would probably say no, but yes, yes, we can. I mean, we can get more for that money, more quality, and somebody that is going to make an impact. If we're spending that money on a player, he needs to make an impact. And whether Sands wasn't given the chance to do that or not, we don't see him in training, and he obviously wasn't quite at the level to make that impact and be given the chance to make that impact. So if we're spending that amount of money, it needs to be on a player that is either starting in the team or certainly pushing towards that. And Sands was really a player that was going to come on for the last 5 minutes at most, really, by the looks of things.
Yes, Scott, I'm interested in a comment here from Teddy Bears. Actually, I would have played Sands before Lundstrom and Kamara last Sunday. Hindsight is a great thing, though. Do you think, had James Sands been given that opportunity, he could have proven himself, or do you think it was, as it is, just that he's not good enough for Rangers at this time, and it's thank you and goodbye?
I think it would have been a big decision to make to throw him in on Sunday. I think if he'd had an opportunity for 3 or 4 games leading into the game on Sunday, potentially, but I don't think it would have been fair to throw him in as poor as Lundstrom particularly and Kamara were on Sunday. I think you're throwing somebody under a bus. I think there was a bit of that happened on Sunday with the team selection. I think to throw Sands in would have been another. It would have been another one to add to the poor decisions that Ross Wilson, Michael Beale made on Sunday.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's interesting because I do think that central midfield will be a position that we have to focus on in the summer as part of the refresh or the rebuild, as many people are describing it. And clearly, Michael Beale doesn't think James Sands fits into what he's looking for in that position, and therefore we do have higher priorities than that. And I think James Sands put a nice message on his social media profiles as well about Rangers, and it does all seem very, very amicable. But it does also seem almost the start of the movement in the squad, and it's interesting to see that the move was made now, Ben, at this stage of the season, even though we've got sort of 12 league games left and a Scottish Cup to go for.
Yeah, but again, he wasn't making impact. I would imagine Beale had no plans whatsoever where he was going to have him, and beyond the loan, even if it had have lasted to the summer. So I think in this 12 games, he thought, what's the point? And probably, to be fair to Sands and to give him the best chance in his career, which he deserves, is to go back to his club, and all the best to him. But really hanging on to him to not use him when he probably wanted to go back and play football, it wouldn't have been right. So it's the right decision.
Yeah, I think so. Scott, is it encouraging for you, I guess, that the signs are that they're looking at the squad and they're reassessing the squad even this early in the I guess approach to the summer transfer window?
Well, I would hope as soon as Michael Beale came in the door in November, part of the conversations that happened early on, even before Sunday, you can't be just waiting to lose a cup final to start planning for next season. Michael Beale will know the position with all the out of contract players. I do believe that. He's not come out and said as much on the high profile ones, but he will know 100% at this point in time who is going to be with us and who isn't going to be with us. So we just have to see how that pans out. But the squad's too big, the wage bill's too big. We should be getting more value for money for the squad that we have. Yada yada yada. It's but it's positive that it's one out the door, and it's hopefully the first of many.
The squad's too big, the wage bill's too big. We should be getting more value for money. Now let's start talking about Ross Wilson, who many people, I think, Ben, believe is largely responsible for those three factors in terms of the size of the squad, the wage bill, and the fact and the quality of player or the quality of performance that we are seeing from these players. I guess he's been the one consistent through Gerrard, Gio, and now Michael Beale. There, a lot was made on Sunday about the number of players who played for Gerrard that were starting in that game. Scott posted, and this was in the TII group chat, but he posted yesterday a poll saying should should Ross Wilson be a part of the change in the summer before the rebuild starts? And I think surprised me a little bit, but overwhelmingly the answer was yes. What are your thoughts on Ross Wilson, his position at Rangers, how successful or unsuccessful he's been?
Funny, I'm surprised that surprised you, because it seems glaringly obvious to me. The club, it's not just the playing staff. At this minute in time, the club needs a revamp. Ross Wilson is a huge part in that. He's a huge part. If we're wanting to rebuild the playing staff, which we very much need to do, would you want to do that with a man whose track record of bringing in players, well, to me is I'll be kind and say mediocre. So yeah, it seems obvious that he there has to be changes with him. I don't put the blame solely on him. And I don't necessarily agree with this whole, as soon as the game was over the other day, there was sort of a hounding for him. I didn't like Ross Wilson. Sorry, I didn't feel Ross Wilson was right, in the job, and I haven't done for quite a long time. And it wasn't a gut reaction to Sunday. But I feel like the changes also need to be bigger than him. I mean, I think the board in general, there needs to be changes. At the end of the day, Ross Wilson has done a certain thing, but he has, in my opinion, failed in his position, but they have allowed him to continually fail in the position, and there needs to be questions about them as much as him. But yeah, I feel like we need to be trying something new. We need a refresh at the club, and I think at all areas of the club, and he's included in that.
Scott, one of the things about Ross Wilson that I find really interesting is that none of us really know what his full remit is. None of us really understand what proportion of his job role is related to transfers and scouting and that side of things. Now, you would imagine that a huge proportion is focused on the first team squad and the football operations around the first team squad. He's also responsible for the B team and the women's team, who haven't been going great guns this season and have tended to lose, I think, the vast majority of big games that they've played in this season, and that's potentially part of a separate discussion, but it feeds into this one as well. What are your, before we get started, and there's loads of comments coming in, and there's loads of comments that were coming in that I'll refer to that being before we came live tonight, but what are your thoughts on Ross Wilson? Are you in agreement with Ben?
Well, I'm glad I put that poll in the group chat. I was quite surprised it was quite as unanimous, to be honest with you. He's been in position just over 3 years. It's a bit hit or a miss, his return, if we're just judging it purely on transfers. The obviously gold star moments are Nathan Patterson and Calvin Bassey. The return, that can't be doubted, but I don't think that's. I would probably compliment the managers for the development of particularly Gio developing Calvin Bassey. So he sold Calvin Bassey at the right time. Calvin Bassey's had a difficult season, so I would say that you've sold him at the right time, which we haven't done enough of. Ross Wilson hasn't done enough of. He has to be part of the conversation with regard to the refresh, the rebuild, the setting everybody on fire, whatever you want to call it. The board, very much as it stands, back Ross Wilson. I think they made that very clear at the AGM, but he is a man 100% under pressure. Do I think he should go? Yeah, I think he probably should. Do I think it will happen? No, I don't. I think it would take significant change within the Rangers board, which Ross Wilson is a part of. He isn't just the director of football and the head of the football operations, first team, B team, women's team, all that sort of stuff. He is part of the Rangers board. So I think it would need a change in the ownership and within the board structure, and for the the people that come in. If myself, one of us three, won 110 million on the Euro Millions on Friday night, and we pop Douglas Park a message on Monday, and we buy in. Ross Wilson would probably be collecting his P45 within a month, but it's going to take change. I don't think the status quo within the board have any intention of removing Ross Wilson from his position.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. What I'm going to do is, Ben, I'll come to you for an initial reaction on some of these comments, but I'm going to run through some of the comments that we've had coming in from viewers and listeners. Teddy Bear's first up. Recruitment has been shocking, but I blame the board more than Wilson. They tell him how much he's got to spend, so he has to find players in that price range. Gary says Ross Wilson needs gone now. His performance regarding recruitment has been a disaster, led us to where we are now. Kenny's saying Wilson is the common denominator in our lack of squad depth. There's quite a breadth of topics in there that people are covering in terms of what they view as a negative performance from Ross Wilson. Ben, where do you think it's a bit of the scatter guns out and people are just had enough, or do you think that people are making valid points here about where they see weaknesses?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think as you say, people have had enough. and will not see any plus points. What's interesting, what you said actually, is what is his remit? Because if his remit has been to bring funds back into the club through low budget signings and the likes of the cross border stuff with Aribo and with Bassi, he's been a success then at that. But at the same time, if you look at the Aribo one, you could look at the position that we got into where we let him run down in his contract, and then we didn't. To me, we could have got more for Aribo than we did, but because he was in the last 12 months was an issue. I can understand people saying that it's the board's fault and they're not giving Wilson enough to spend, but he needs to be with whatever his budget is, whatever club you're at. If your budget is 100 grand or your budget is 100 million, you're judged on how you spend that. So if our budget was small, and we're going to spend 3 million on Matondo, I know I keep coming back to that one thing, but that's not good. That's not good enough. And also, was the wages and things. I know that we got a reduced deal and stuff, but was Aaron Ramsey, was that worthwhile? Was Diallo on a short-term thing? Was that worthwhile, or could things of resources been spent better? And I would say yes.
Yeah, Scott. Just on that one, John Weir's comment there, and Ben touched on it slightly. Wilson is rated by the board because of the Bassi and Aribo transfers. In my opinion, I would tend to agree with that, and I think that's a major feather or two feathers in his cap that he can point to. I think Nathan Patterson is probably a third one in there that you could add in terms of the money brought in. Duncan McInnes says the board recruited Ross Wilson and financially they have been moderately successful. What are your thoughts on that side of things, and do you think that the sales or the successful transitions from minimal investment in the likes of Bassi and Aribo into big transfer fees is what the board are looking for, and is why Ross Wilson is viewed as being successful in what he's been doing?
I think so, to be honest with you. I mean, I done a wee bit of scouting about before we came on, and when he left Southampton, the feeling within the Southampton support was very similar. He had a bit of a hit or a miss record. I mean, I think he'd sold a couple of big players to Liverpool at that point when Liverpool were using Southampton as their sort of feeder club. So that sort of papered over other mistakes and other signings that didn't work out. So he didn't come from Southampton to Rangers as the perfect director of football, head of recruitment, whatever you want to call him. So what has happened now is very similar to what actually happened at his previous club. And I think that repeat what I said. I think the board, they I'm not saying they're money driven, but I think too much focus is given on the business and selling, bringing players in for low and selling high. We all just want Rangers to be the best team on the park and to get back to winning trophies. I could talk for the next 5 minutes, but you'll come on to that. I think that there's too much focus on bringing low. I mean, even now we're talking about signing Malik Tillman for 6 million, and it's ingrained into us now. Or we could just keep him for 18 months and we'll sell him for 12 million. Whereas the mentality should be, can Malik Tillman for £6 million help us get the league title back and win trophies and get into the Champions League, instead of this that has been ingrained into our brains because of what we have heard from within the club about the business model and buy low, sell high, all that sort of stuff, and be like Ajax and all that sort of situation. I just want Rangers from top to bottom to get back to focusing on the priority, which is putting a winning team on the park and winning trophies on a consistent basis. And they're all failing. It's not just Ross Wilson, Douglas Park, all the way down. They're all failing in that regard.
Yeah, I think everyone on here and everyone listening or watching will echo those sentiments, in that we want to see a winning Rangers on the park, and that is the main priority above all for us. And we want to see silverware lifted above the captain's head more and more often, especially more often than we have in recent years. In terms of focusing on the business side of things, Scott Teddy Bears agrees with you. Seems to me the board are focusing on off-field matters like Edmiston House and building flats next to Ibrox. We're a football team first. Interestingly, some of the comments, and I'll bring in Crawford Hume, who was previously a podder here with us at TII and hopefully will be at some point in the future again. Wilson is useless, but I base that more on the contract situation of several players rather than recruitment. I doubt he has total say on players coming and going. The board in general needs replaced. Caroline echoes that it's the contract situation that bugs me. Ben, it's interesting that for all that Ross Wilson seems to be assessed on the success or failure of the players that we sign, the contract situation and the frustration at how that is managed at the club seems to be growing more and more. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, because to me it's a bit of negligence. It's a failure to protect your assets. We don't want to tie down all these players and obviously tie down the wage budget, which would impact who's coming in and stuff. But at the same time, we don't want players like Aribo that getting into the last year of his contract, or Ryan Kent brought in for $7.5 million, walk out the door for free. Probably if you asked me that full-time Sunday, I'd have paid for him to leave. But at the same time, for the club to grow and to be continually bringing in more money, which will eventually hopefully be reinvested back into the team, then part of its job, as much as we all want to see players coming in, it's to look after the players that are there and make sure that they're tied down if we want them tied down, or they're moved on at the right time if we need to move them on. Part of the big failing, and whether that's been management, and it goes as far back as 55 season, when Gerrard said that he didn't want to sell his best players in the summer, a lot of them should have been sold at that point. And whether a director of football needs to work with the manager, but whether at that point he needs to kind of say to the manager, my job is to protect the club, and to protect the club, I need to move on some of these at the right time to get the right fees. So for me, he's failing in that aspect as well.
Yeah, Scott, Ben mentioned there some of the fees that were mooted around. Let's focus on Morelos and Kent, because those are two that are prominent in the mind and they're most relevant in terms of the contract situation. RFC 72 comes in and says failed to sell Morelos at his peak for 17 million and Kent for 14-15 million, 30 plus million gone for nothing. Now, I'll play devil's advocate a wee bit in this, in that if we had sold Alfredo Morelos and Ryan Kent the summer after winning 55, I think there would have been uproar amongst the Rangers support. I might be wrong, but I think there would have been uproar amongst the Rangers support. I think for me, Alfredo Morelos' time at Rangers is coming to an end, and rightfully so. A bit concerned that Michael Beale said that he's keen to keep Alfredo Morelos for longer, but I think his time's coming to an end, and ultimately we need to remember that we bought Alfredo Morelos for £1 million 6 years ago. We have definitely had value for money out of Alfredo Morelos. I don't think anyone is arguing that. We've had significant value well beyond what we could have hoped for a £1 million signing. The signing of Alfredo Morelos has been a success. What do you make of the idea that actually we're holding on to players for too long, and that we should be selling these players earlier, even if it does frustrate the fans or annoy the fans? And I guess fans getting too attached to players. Now, that's partly what we do as fans. We fall in love with certain players who offer us certain things and give us exciting moments and winning goals and all that sort of stuff. What do you make of that whole situation and how the board should be balancing that?
Yeah, it's a it's not an easy question to answer. I just had a wee search on that. Morelos, the bid from Lille came in actually before 55. It was the summer before 55. So, play devil's advocate. Would we have won 55 if it was just Kemar Roofe and Cedric Itten? But what I will say is the Calvin Bassey signing, the sale, that is how you do it. You sell them at their optimum value. I think Leeds were interested in Ryan Kent. Gerrard should have been basically told, we need to sell. If you want Joey Veerman and another player, you need to sell Glenn Kamara, or you need to sell Ryan Kent to finance that and to refresh. And I think that's all part of the ship has sailed since we won that league title. It is frustrating that players their contracts are running down. It's frustrating that we're going to lose Kent and Morelos. You quite rightly say, for what we paid for Morelos, he's given us, so much in return for that. So I said on this before, I just hope he leaves with on a high sort of situation. Ryan Kent's a different situation because you have put so much money into him. £7.5 million, probably £1 million a year over 4 years. You're going to lose that for nothing. But players hold the power with regard to contracts, and I think sometimes, unless the cash is actually on the table, it's very difficult to sell a player if the offer isn't other than Leo with Morelos. Do we actually know that Ryan Kent, there was an offer for Leeds on the table? And you just don't know, Craig. It's we're going into a contract situation at the other end where John Lundstrom this summer is going into the last year of his contract. He's not worth 25 million, but similar situation. A decision will have to be made on John Lundstrom. Either he is extended. Personally, I wouldn't extend him. I would be looking to offload to somebody in the English Championship. Borna Barisic, going into the last 12 months of his contract, same situation, at an age where it's probably his last big move. So I'm looking at Yilmaz as the future and basically saying, right, thanks very much, Borna, but you are part of the group of players that have lost. Serial losers, I think's been the expression. I think it's the time for you to be sold, because you can't have a situation again next summer where you're going to have another 2 players leaving for nothing. So it's all there's so many factors, Craig, that Ross Wilson has to get right, and he's getting more wrong than he's getting right at this point for me.
Helps if I unmute myself when I was talking.
It's usually you telling me.
I think that's fair from Scott, and Ben, I'll come on to your thoughts on that in a second around finding the right time to sell players and how that balances with fan opinion. Just bringing a couple of comments that have been coming in the meantime. Teddy Bear's saying, I'm tired of Morelos and Kent now, time to move them both on. John Wallace coming a bit to the defence of Ross Wilson. Why don't you blame Ross for playing unfit players on Sunday? He gets the blame for everything else. Nicholas Moore, we've hung on to players for too long and now they're worth peanuts. There's loads of comments along those kind of lines. Nicholas Stubborn, look, football ain't about profit, it's about winning the things and balancing the books. Twisted 1690, we have fatigued and plateaued as a team, out with the old, in with the new. Ross Wilson needs to go. I think we're getting every kind of thought and feeling under the sun in the comments section at the moment, Ben. But just on that question I posed to Scott there around finding the right time to sell and balancing that with fan opinion and everything like that, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important to find out. I mean, if we're going back to that, the Kent and Morelos time, if they were both, although Scott's right, Morelos was a year before, but it would be a case of you sell one of them. I think if fans see you have a winning team and you're decimating it, and they're all leaving, they're going to be annoyed. But I think if you sell one of them, and the important thing is that I don't think the fans will be as annoyed if they can see this money's come in and it's being reinvested. For me, what I think, obviously Bassi was sold at the right time, but for me, what's annoyed me about that is the money wasn't spent and he wasn't replaced. And even after qualifying for the Champions League on top of the Bassi sale, he still wasn't replaced, and the money still wasn't spent. So I think fans can understand that we don't like it, but football's a business, and you have to sell these players. You got to look at them and say, do they want to be here long term? And because we want to build a team around people that want to be there, but at the same time, it needs to work for both parties. So if for the club we need to refresh and we need to sell them at the right time, it's important that we do that. But at the same time that they're replaced, and it's not just we're weakening it. There's a lot of money in the bank, but we're not. Our team isn't as good. That's what concerns. But yeah, replacing them is the key thing, and spending some of the money.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and we'll come on to talking about how much money do we need to spend in an ideal world, and actually how much money do we feel there is in the pot for us in the summer, and how do we as a club try and maximise that. Scott touched on John Lundstrom potentially looking to try and punt him to the Championship for a couple of £1 million if we can. Borna Barisic is a Croatia international left back. He will garner some interest from clubs, whether it be in the UK or further afield in Europe. I think it'll be interesting to watch that one. Again, I think Borna Barisic would be a sign of where the club is heading, if I'm being honest, in terms of if we hold on to Borna Barisic, then we're still doing what we were doing before and we've not learned our lesson. If we were to sell on Borna Barisic at this stage at the end of this season, then I think you start to think, okay, we've learned from our mistakes and we're moving forward on that side of things.
Can I just say, Craig, there was one of the comments, I think it was Teddy Bears, had actually said it was about if we had won on Sunday, everything would be rosy, or that was it. I don't think we probably wouldn't be sitting here having the conversation as robustly, but I think the issues would still remain. I think if you win the League Cup, then it's great. It helps you kick on, hopefully, for the rest of the season, and hopefully lift the Scottish Cup at the end of the season. But it's I think everything that needs to happen in the summer would have needed to happen regardless of what happened on Sunday, in my opinion. Just the decimation of the squad, certainly, I think the next 3 months could sign a few P45s for pretty much all of those that have been losers over the last few years, and that includes Tav and Goldson, because I saw that mentioned as one of the comments as well. So just because you win on Sunday, it wouldn't change the validity of Ross Wilson's job, the board's job, and everything else.
Yeah, Ben, I think I said on Monday's podcast, but I think the next 12 league games in the Scottish Cup run will be particularly interesting, partly from seeing how Michael Beale figures out his squad and who he wants to keep and who he wants to let go. I think part of it will be who turns up on the big games and who's able to fit into how Michael Beale wants to play. It'll be interesting to see how young players are brought into the team as well, and if we start to try and give them some experience around that. How do you see what I guess is, although we've only in realistic terms we've probably got a Scottish Cup to go for, and that's all for the remainder of the season, how do you see how important the next 3 months are, not only from figuring out what players are staying and what players are going, but from an overall Michael Beale knowing what he wants and what he needs to do in the transfer market in the summer?
I think it's very important. I think, although we don't want to be in this position, and it might sound stupid, but in a way, Michael Beale's lucky because, as a Rangers manager, you don't generally get this period where you have 12 league games that, although we need to win and we want to win, we're not going for a title right now. I mean, I'll be honest, we're not. So he has this period to look at his players, to work out what way he wants us to play and what way he wants us to look next season. So he has this period of preparation, although you're always doing that. It's kind of bonus time in a way. We don't want it. We want to be, fighting it out for a title. But the damage was done title wise before he came in. The only opportunity he's had to close the gap due to their results was against them, and he came very close to doing that. But it's important for him also to look at the likes of McCrory in goal. At times now, I don't think he'll be a Rangers number one. But to even look at the point of view is, could I rely on him as a number two next season if I needed to? Because I think we need a new keeper. To get, if he ever returns, Yilmaz, give him a run of games to be able to look at, okay, if I'm thinking of shifting on Borna, which I think we should do, is Yilmaz right now ready to be a starting every week, left back for us? This is the time where we find out these things. And although I understand that these players won't be playing necessarily, there's still pressure, but they won't be playing under the pressure of the start of next season when it's, and we're starting fresh and we're trying to win a league. But I still think that it's important that we see them playing regularly, and maybe the likes of Lowry now is time to see him playing again, to gauge just exactly where he's at and what he can give to us right now and for next season.
Yeah, I think, and I'm keen to get your thoughts on something Scott picked up as well, and Gary kind of touches on it here in this comment. Tavernier, Kamara, Goldson, Lundstram, Davies, Kent all need sold ASAP. Hopeless and scored a lot of them. Ross Wilson out too, as his recruitment is shite. I mean, I'd probably split that list in half for the ones that I think should be sold and shouldn't. I think Tavernier, Goldson, Davies are certs to still be here this time next season. I think Kamara and Lundstram I would let go in the summer, and then Ryan Kent I'm kind of on the fence about, if I'm being brutally honest. I think what Scott mentioned, obviously Tavernier and Goldson need to prove themselves as well over the next 3 months, 4 months, however long we've got until the end of the season. For me, Connor Goldson has already proven himself. I think his value to the team was proven from the moment he got injured against Liverpool all the way through to his return after the World Cup. I think Connor Goldson's value to the team couldn't have been more clear in that time, and I think he's a cert to be here next year. James Tavernier is a bit of a scapegoat for fans, and it does frustrate me that he is. I don't think his performances have been up to the level that we've seen the 2 years previously. To be honest, I think that last year's, especially during the Europa League run, was a complete outlier in James Tavernier's career, because he was just so good and he was so consistent over such a long period of time, and he contributed so much, but he continues to contribute despite potentially not having his best season from open play. Where do you sit in terms of, in particular, Tavernier and Goldson, and where they are, if they've got a future at Rangers? I find Ben Davies' name being in there a bit quite interesting, but I think him and Goldson is the partnership we need to sort of build that solid spine around, to be honest. And if we're going to be replacing the goalkeeper as well in the summer, then having your central defensive partnership solid and having played for the vast majority of a season together can only help with that transition. But where do you sit on the sort of Tavernier Goldson side of things?
Yeah, the Tavernier Goldson, for me, I wouldn't begin to question them leaving. I mean, they should be there. Now, the one thing I would question, Goldson for me is we saw, as you've just said, we saw how different we are without him when he was injured for that period. And I've no way would be getting rid of him. Tavernier, I would certainly be keeping. Now between the end of this season, I would like to be seeing an upturn in his performances. But I would have him regardless as a member of the squad who starts a lot of games. But what I would like to see, regardless of whether Tav plays brilliantly between now and the end of the season, is that I would like to see some competition brought in for him. If Devine is that player, great, but we need to actually see him to know that. Other than he did well in the few games that he's had, but it's not enough to judge him on. And the fact that he hasn't been getting any football of late, one, it sort of surprised me. It surprised me he didn't play in the cup against Partick. But the fact that he's not being played maybe means that the manager doesn't quite think that he's up to the level as of yet. But yeah, I think Tav needs some competition. Davies, I've seen enough to know that he is a good player to have around. I think I would like us to see somebody signed that will push him. May not necessarily start ahead of him, but may. But he certainly wouldn't be going anywhere. Kamara, I've always loved Kamara, and I've always said to myself, he'll refine his form, but he just hasn't gone to. So I think it's time to go our separate ways. On John Lundstrom, yeah, as Scott said there, I didn't realize that he was going to be a year out. If we were to get somebody that was going to offer us a couple of million for him, yeah, I would move him on. I definitely would.
Yeah, Scott, just we're also talking about James Tavernier, Connor Goldson, we spoke about Borna Barisic just before that. Ali Quinn comes in here with a comment. It's slightly off the topic of recruitment, but it's one that's been discussed quite regularly. Why do we keep losing the same goals then? Europa League final, then same again on Sunday. Wakey, he calls Goldson shite, which I've already pushed back on, but we do seem to lose very similar goals quite often. Why do you think that is, and how do we sort that? I realise you're not the manager, or
I always think it's never one person that's at fault. Anytime we lose a goal, I think there's always I think the first goal on Sunday's the key. When you look at it, it's Tav, Golson, Davies that are, but I think the tracking for the middle of the park, I think it was Aaron Moy got into a pocket. He played the ball wide to Greg Taylor. Ball comes in. They've got men in the box. That's another moan of mine. They always gamble and have players in the box sort of situation. But what I was meaning with regard to Connor Goldson is he is effectively the captain without the armband, in my opinion. But he has to get everybody else. I mean, I stayed for my sins. I stayed pretty much until the Rangers end was empty. I have absolutely no idea why on Sunday, but he looked absolutely spewing. Goldson, and the conversations that have happened in the training ground this week and how the performances that we see moving forward, that's where the leaders in the group have to get around their teammates and actually get them performing. Tav, I think he's the captain. He's always the scapegoat. It's always been the case. Like he does it at the RTV interview on Sunday. He gets moaned at, and I probably had a moan on my social media about it. I'm fed up hearing the same patronising stuff. But equally, yesterday when I thought about it, if he hadn't done the RTV interview, he'd have been criticised because he hadn't like showed face sort of thing. So, Tav is Marmite. I think that's the you either love him or you hate him. That is not going to change now, and it won't change between now and the end of his Rangers career. I don't believe he's what him. I think the back four I think, is pretty much cemented. Tav, Goldson, Davies, Yilmaz, I think that's there. We all want to set the whole squad on fire. The board, the director of football. It isn't going to be physically possible to sell 16 players this summer and bring 16 players in. Isn't possible. You might be able to do it if you're playing Football Manager, but in real life, you can't do that. What happens this summer is every player that's out of contract goes, right? There's your opportunity. And I include Morelos in that. You know my love for Morelos, but he's ran his race. Ryan Kent ran his race. All these players, thanks very much. You've gave us decent service. You didn't win as much, but you've got an opportunity. Line in the sand. I don't know how many players that comes to. How much wages is that freed up? That's when Ross Wilson then has to, working with Michael Beale, spend that money wisely. It isn't about spending 100 million. If we've only got 10 million, it's about spending that 10 million properly. I go back to Walter Smith, when Walter Smith was manager the second time round. Walter Smith never had any money to spend. There was one summer he signed Nikita Jelavic for 4 million because that was all his budget was, because he thought that Nikita Jelavic would make the difference. And he did. I think we went on to win a couple of league titles sort of situation. So it's how you, if we've got 15 million to spend, goalkeeper, centre midfielder, striker, right? We probably need more than that. But if you're
still not buying a right winger, we've needed one of those for years.
But I still think the spine of the side, you have to get the spine of any successful side. And I look across the city and they have a strong spine. The goalkeeper's dodgy, but they have a strong spine, middle of the park. You know, Callum McGregor was walking about with his slippers on Sunday. Nobody got close to him. It was 2 touches all the time. Nobody got in his face, sort of thing. But I think the thing for the summer for me is nobody gets a new contract that's out of contract, and you then use that money and any budget that you've got for transfer fees to bring in. Listen, I've went through the emotions over the last 2 or 3 days. I'm glad I'm speaking tonight rather than on Monday, but we can recover this with good recruitment. But that goes back to Ross Wilson, and are we recruiting in the right areas? Are we only dealing with certain agents? Do we look abroad? Do we look far enough afield with regard to our recruitment? But to get back to, I think, the original point, I've basically went off on a tangent there, but Tav, Goldson, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. I don't think. I think there's other areas that we have to address first.
Yeah, Gary comes in here with an interesting point, which probably is a discussion for a whole other pod in itself. But too many people are sentimental about some of these players because of 55. Yes, that was great, but it was years ago. You can't live in the past. Need to move on. And I think that comes back to a discussion that was had on, I think it was Monday night's podcast. I can't quite remember. It seems like ages ago. But I think it was around the people who have grown up as Rangers fans, just Rangers winning, and their expectations and the standards that they believe are set, compared to the younger fans now who have grown up. Basically, their teenage years and adulthood has been 2012 onwards, and they seem to have a very different attitude as to how to approach this. I think that's an interesting point, Ben, that we need to bear in mind, and it's potentially one of the reasons why we have such polarising opinions across the Rangers support.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do need to move on from 55 completely now. I mean, it's 2 years ago now, or nearly 3, or whatever it is. I can't even remember now. It's but you know, the players are great. They deserve recognition for that, and it'll not be something that we'll ever forget. But you're only as good as your last game. You've got to keep producing. They would have been legends if at 55 they did what they did, but then they kicked on from that. But it seemed almost, without knowing their trying to read their minds, but it seemed almost like they themselves thought, look what we've done, we've delivered 55, we can now just sit back and go, we did it. But it's like, we're Glasgow Rangers, we win 55, then we go on, we get 56. And, that's what they across the city have right now, which is, they have the right mentality for it. And I think mentally we don't. We need to be focused on winning, not just winning and admiring it. We need to, and it is. I can understand people that have, as you say, their teenage years or whatever. We're in the wonderful years that we've had for the last 10 years, but this club is built on success and it's built on winning, and it needs to get back to that on a consistent basis, or we need to not be. I mean, when would you ever have thought at Rangers would be going, oh well, we won the league 3 years ago, we won the league 2 years ago? No, we need to win this league, we need to win next league and the one after that. Now, you're not going to win it every single year because there's two teams, but you need to be not 9 points behind.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that in terms of the Wolves, I'm going to say I've got to read out 4 5s there, but I was like, nah, I can't be bothered with that one. So we'll call him the Wolf. Well, I think at his point, the board thought it would be good enough without too much investment in the team stands true, and I think it still runs to this day. We obviously saw big fees coming in for the likes of Patterson, Aribo, Bassey. We know after the uproar last summer exactly how these kind of fees and transfers work in terms of the money spread over 3 years, 4 years, however long the contract is. It doesn't arrive in a lump sum, yada, yada, yada. We know all of that and we understand that. I definitely think there's been a part, and probably a bigger part than we understand, in terms of those who've invested money in the club have taken money out of the club. And I think that's a major part that there's no transparency on at this moment in time. I know John Bennett was one who came forward and said, yeah, look, I've received X amount back as repayment for a loan, and I do understand that, but I think there's been many more instances of that and we've not had sight of it, which is part of the reason why the club hasn't invested as much as I think as fans we would have wanted them to, or would have expected them to, and transfers to as you say, Ben, push on from 55 and not rest on our laurels and keep going from there. Teddy Bears comes in and says the board charged the fans the maximum allowed by UEFA for Champions League tickets, and it's sold out. We buy all the tops they put out, 3, 4, 5 a season. The board are to blame. I think from a financial perspective, I think it's really interesting because we're sitting here now, and actually I've got 2 comments here, one from Nicholas Moore and one from Al.RFC, which touch on the sort of final point that I was looking to make and ask you guys about, Scott and Ben and the listeners, around how much money do you think we will have in the summer to spend? Nicholas Moore says, as a club, do we actually have any cash to spend on players? Al.RFC says, have to admit, expect the board to spend big in summer, but what if there's no money? Which, in the grand scheme of things, seems a bit ludicrous considering the level of fees that we've commanded for those 3 players that I mentioned beforehand. But it was a question that I was actually asking myself, and when we were having the discussion as a group after the game on Sunday, we all kind of said, do we have the resources to rebuild this team how it needs to be rebuilt? Now, Scott, you've focused a lot on the spine of the team, and that's probably where we do need to focus on. We've, I guess you could say, wasted money on £3 million is the prime example in Ravi Matondo. I know, Ben, you've mentioned that about 40 times already this podcast, and so I hope Ravi Matondo isn't watching. But I think that it's working out, where do we spend that money. Realistically, you're looking at probably need to spend £15 million minimum to give ourselves a bit of a shot in the arm. Scott, where do you land on all of this? Do you think the money is there? Do you think we should have more money than we currently do? How do you think we best approach this in the summer?
Well, I think last summer we signed Yilmaz for 5, Davies for 4, and Matondo for 3. I can't actually recall anybody else. I expected us to spend, and this was off the back of the Europa League run, selling Aribo and selling Calvin Bassey. I expected us to spend more last summer, so I think we spent less. This summer, I'm still in the 10 to 15 million. That's the sort of budget that I'm expecting. But I think Gav, and obviously one of the podders, is basically, he talks a very similar game to myself with regard to good scouting, making use of the Bosman market, or getting a Todd Cantwell or a Nico Raskin that's coming towards the end of their contract, so you might pick them up for less, sort of thing. I think that all comes back to Michael Beale and Ross Wilson working collaboratively to bring in the right players. Just because you've got 50 million doesn't mean you spend that 50 million. You can still waste 50 million. I was watching the overlap with Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher when I was working today, and they were talking about Man United up until this season. Man United have spent hundreds of millions of pounds, but they've squandered hundreds of millions of pounds. I said this earlier on, if we've got 10 to 15 million pounds and we've freed up £200,000 a week, for example, in wages, which isn't out with the bounds of possibility with some of the big earners that are. It's what you do with that. This is what Ross Wilson and Michael Beale have to get right. This should have been, the conversations would have started November, December, January, February, so they know the targets that they have got. I think Michael Beale, during his press conference that it seemed like he had every day in January, spoke about having targets in mind. The number 9, I think he spoke about, he has one specific target. Is that somebody that's going to cost £5 million, or is that somebody that's out of contract or going into the last 12 months? You just don't know. We just have to get value for what we have available. That's the. But I think 10 to 15 million, I think is a realistic budget, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, Ben, one of the comments here from Finn Fogel has probably been a bit over ambitious here. Rangers need to be spending over £20 million on 5 or 6 starters. Anything less and we are runners up again next season. I think that is overly ambitious, if I'm being honest. And realistically, if you look at the law of averages as to how many transfers, especially at the moment with Rangers recruitment, how many transfers are a success and how many aren't. If you're spending £20 million on 5 or 6, you're probably wasting about half of that. So I think realistically, as Scott mentioned, we need a goalkeeper, we need 1, maybe 2 central midfielders, and we'll definitely need 1 starting first choice striker, probably 2, because I think I don't. Kamaru isn't reliable enough. Alfredo Morelos will be out the door. Leaves you with Antonio Cholak really there, and I don't think he's in the long term a starter for Rangers in all games. And I think he's a player who can contribute, and I think he's a player who knows how to find the back of the net. But I don't think he's an out and out starter for Rangers. So, what are your thoughts on Finn Fogel's comment there, and potentially where that money needs to be spent?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love us to have 20 million to spend. I don't think we do. I think around that 15 million is probably more realistic, and that might slightly push it as well. I think that this isn't going to be this summer fixed. It's going to be at least 2, maybe 3. I know we don't want to hear that, but transfer windows, because we don't have the money to throw about all over the place. So I think it's going to take patience, which is not something that fans are generally good at. And we may suffer a little bit further, but it's going to need to be done sort of incrementally. I feel like we need to be smart, like what Scott said there is 100%. We need to be using the Bosman market, but also like when you look at the rebuild that they did, when they brought in Carter Vickers on loan, they used that. They brought in Jota on loan, and okay, they've gone and they've bought them, but I mean, to have players of that ability on loan at your club, and then have them, buy into what you want to do and eventually coming is big and is good. So we need to be looking at those type of players and making sure that they're sensible loans. I'm not talking an Andy King or something like that, like from a couple of years ago. I'm talking about loaning players that are realistic for us to get in the future, but also players that aren't coming towards the end and are just coming for a kickabout, but are players that can add to our starting 11 or squad without us spending money that we don't have on top of what we do spend. I think we're going to be letting a lot of players go at the end of their contracts, so that will free up wages. Morelos on a high wage, Kent on a high wage. At this minute in time, I'd obviously let both of them go. So that will hopefully enable us to spend that little bit more, be it on Bosman's. We certainly need a keeper. I would like another centre half. I think John Suter is good enough, but I mean, he's going to play as much as Roof is going to play, so that says it all. We need a centre midfielder. We need two strikers. For me, Cholak isn't good enough to be a starter for Rangers. I think, as you said, he will have his uses and he maybe come on and score goals. And maybe that's harsh, people think, after the start of the season he's had, but just of late, I just don't think he's quite at that level. We still need that right winger. We're gonna need a left winger. Kent plays every single game, and I don't think he's going to be there. But we're not going to be able to do this all at once, so that's why I'm talking about the likes of the loans. But I'd agree with Scott that the spine is the most important thing, and we need to kind of strengthen that up. We've started to do that. It's a good thing because I really, really, really like the look of Raskin thus far, and I think we need to be building players to play around him. So the good thing is that the work has started, but it's not going to be an overnight fix.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nico Raskin is what everything should be built around at this moment in time. A young, promising, vibrant player who has the ability, but also that little bit of aggression that you need to succeed in Scottish football. And I think from what I've seen of Raskin, and it just makes the starting lineup on Sunday even more baffling. I think he's the one that you build everything around and take it from there. The way you were listing off positions and players there, Ben, I think R30 comes in with like 5 or 6 million on 20 players, which is always the fear from that side of things. And King Rec coming in here with, I think, probably the most sensible approach to it. If we can bring in 8 to 10 million plus, say, 10 million from last year's profit, we should be able to buy 4 or 5 players. Scott, just before we round off the podcast, Ben spoke quite a bit about the loan market there and being able to utilise that effectively. It's not a market we've done particularly well in recent years. Outdoor FC came with a point earlier on, says we need to look at new markets, not the usual free loans, injury prone. I guess we've not had great success, and we have seen other clubs, including Celtic, have success with those styles of deals. Do you think that the loans and those free transfers, similar to what we did almost did with Cantwell, I guess we ended up paying a small fee, I think, to Norwich to get him now instead of in the summer. But do you think those kind of deals have a major part to play in how we succeed in rebuild?
I think it'll be interesting because Michael Beale was obviously asked about loans during the January window, and he didn't seem, I don't know if he was just talking about loans in in January, or whether that was his policy moving forward. He doesn't strike me as a manager that wants to develop other clubs' players without a realistic possibility that Rangers can. That's my thing. I mean, we'll throw Billy Gilmour. He's perennially linked with Rangers, but Billy Gilmour's £10 million went to Brighton, so we could bring Billy Gilmour in on loan, but the reality is we wouldn't be able to buy him. So what's the point? We're getting Billy Gilmour games for 30-40 games a season, but he's not going to be a Rangers player moving forward. So I think it'll be an interesting one, because there's a lot of players that are going to go out the door. There might not be enough money to bring in the bodies, so they're going to have to be creative with regard to it. I mean, I think the Malik Tillman loan with the agreed fee sort of situation, that could be something that we do, but I don't think a loan just for a year's loan, without any sort of realistic possibility of buying the player. I think Michael Beale wants to be working with a young player or an emerging player for the next 2 or 3 years. What's the point of developing Billy Gilmour for nine months and then he goes back down the road to Brighton, and then Brighton sell him to Crystal Palace or something like that? So that doesn't really do Rangers any good. So we'll just have to wait and see with regard to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of what we've discussed tonight is watch this space. And while we've given a lot of opinions, and there's been hundreds of opinions coming in the comments, and please do keep them coming in. We're always interested to see, even after the podcast finishes, what people think and get their views on it. But I think it's one that's going to rumble on and on and on. Like you said, I think away back at the start, Scott, while we think Ross Wilson should be on his way out the door, I don't think that's the view of the Rangers board at this moment in time, and I do expect Ross Wilson to be leading Rangers into another transfer window in the summer, and what is an absolutely huge transfer window for the club in terms of success and having a solid platform to build upon moving forward. If you've liked the content tonight, please drop the video a like. That really helps us out in terms of reaching more people. If you have enjoyed the content, also remember to subscribe to the TII YouTube channel. We're almost at the 5,000 subscribers mark. We're ever so close. So please, if you've not subscribed already, click that button and toggle on those notifications so you get an email every single time we go live. Scott, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem. It's been good therapy. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Absolutely. We're 3 days on, but we're getting there. Ben, thank you very much for joining us as well. Much appreciated.
Yes, cheers for having me. Yeah, enjoyed that.
And thank you very much to everyone who has been listening over the past hour and 15 minutes or so. In terms of what we've got coming up on the TII network for the rest of the week, we'll be back post-match after the Kilmarnock game at Ibrox on Sunday. I can't wait for another Rangers game to come around, to be honest. I'm gutted there's not a midweek game this week, but we'll be back after the game against Kilmarnock at Ibrox, and we will then be back again with our full week review on Sunday night live at 8 p.m. on YouTube. Until then, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.